should be a good game. All right, so we've been going through Genesis. If you haven't, a little bit, you've on Genesis. Genesis is a great book. I really recommend reading it. If you haven't started making that a habit or trying to start something for the year, great place to start. Try out Genesis. A lot packed into Genesis, a lot of history in Genesis, a lot of interesting stories that we've all heard. A lot of stories we haven't heard a lot as well. And of course, they all have a lot of meaning. And it's a book to get into. So we've been trying to hit some of them, and we talked about Abraham last week. And so kind of review, if you just kind of see the timeline, you have chapters 11 and 12. We notice the calling of, most likely he grew up pagan. His dad was, that was probably someplace that he was at. And we see that God calls him out of Haran to the land of Canaan. Then in chapter 12 and 13, we see that he did not trust God. We didn't go over this story, but he kind of went away from that like a lot of us do. And he went south. He went to famine. We know that story about Egypt. Lied about his wife, didn't go where he needed to go, and so we see Abraham not doing close to somebody that we relate to. And then in chapter, we see a different side of Abraham. We see a man of courage. We see a man that says, all right, he's going to step up. We see that he takes these 300 servants. A lot about that number. Reasons, sometimes we see those, sometimes we don't. But there were 318 crew of Abraham, and he went these 4 kings against these 5 kings. Last week about, they're not so much kings of these great nations, smaller, they're more like tribes, they're more like, so these guys would get together and kind of have these, and what we see is that Lot is captive, and so Abraham goes and fights, and it's him out of there, gets Lot out of there, takes the spoils back, returns them all back to those kings, even goes as far as Sodom. So we start to see the beginnings of that Sodom and Gomorrah story as we get closer to chapter 15. We finally see this covenant that starts to come and play out a little bit. We see the 10,000 stars that we talked about last week. Count them. You can't actually count 10,000 stars. Figure that out. But of course, he's talking about the descendants of Abraham. And then we see something very, again, as we see that God is, that have followed God, this is what we see often. He said this, Abram said that, and God, he was accounted to as, it's important. This belief is key, right? We see it all the time. And that's a pretty loaded word. That you believe in Genesis chapter verse 1. Believing that Jesus died on the cross and rose. You believe that he was God and that he was man. When you see this belief, you see this as our haven't made that decision. This has to happen. It has to. And then we see the contrast. Might be in the story. They don't have this. But God has this covenant all along. We see it in chapter 16. And we see this kind of compromise. We see what we do a lot. There was time. Didn't just happen. Promised him a son. Promised him his flesh and blood. Didn't happen the next day. And then 5 years later, so what does he do? We didn't go over this story, but we all kind of know it. He has his handmaid, Hagar, and they say, all right, we're promise happen, and they do things they shouldn't have done, even if it was acceptable back then, but they have a child through this maid servant, and we see this doubt. So we got to remember, we have God reveals something, or it's just you're waiting to see where God, when that time happens, we have time, we doubt. We're going to see that doubt. So it just happened. You got to understand, it's not just one event after. like I talked about with Acts chapter, all the chapters, it's 30 years of life. There's only one, basically, a miracle. So that's not a lot. It's not just a day, it's something. And so in between that time, we have doubt. But we need to be patient. We need to learn how to be waiting on God and see when he wants to fulfill those promises. And then in chapter 17, we see that his name is changed, Ham. And we see this, and we didn't talk about it, but we see the circumcision. He's 99 years old. First time we see the circumcision. We don't need to go any further than that. We all know that was kind of a crazy deal, but he's 99, and that's when that happened. And then we see this, another contrast. We see this versus type thing. We see Abraham versus Lot, which is interesting. Because here we see Abraham, he's leading this blessed life. Right? He's got a good life. Things are happening. Land, he's getting animals. It's growing. And then we have Lot that we see the kind of the opposite. We're watching and you have the brother who, everything good happens. He touches, Raymond gets everything. That's kind of what's happening. You have Lot, things aren't working out. He's got a troubled life, right? He's got a lot of calamity in his life. He's got a lot of blight in his life. Things are not working out. Then we have Psalm 1:1, and I don't have it up for it. I just stand in the way that sinners take or sit in company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law, meditates on his law day. I would say this really fits Abraham. It fits his life here, this blessed person. And God has blessed him. We see this happen through. We see it happen through his families. We see it happen through his descendants. And I think Abraham is a good role model to look at. I think we can learn a lot from Abraham here this morning. But not Lot. Lot had a rough life. He was troubled. And Abraham gained and Lot lost. Abraham had all these blessings and Lot lost his favorite town, Sodom. He lost his wife. He lost his children. But remember, Abraham wasn't perfect. Right? He stayed faithful, though. He was humble. He did fail. He did sin. But he kept obeying. So I think he is a good role model to really learn what this looks like. All right? So, and we see with that Psalm 1, it says, in his old age he bears forth fruit. A person that is the Psalm 1:1. And that's where I want to go. That's what I want my life to look at. That in my later years, just like Abraham, that he was a continued blessing. That God continued to bless him. And that he poured forth, fruit. And that when God blesses us, we know that he blesses other people around us. And that when I'm old, I've been thinking about being old now lately because everyone's told me I'm old. And you start to think about those things. Like, is my life still a blessing to other people? And have I poured into things I need to go now so that when I get to that ripe age, that I'm still bearing some fruit, I'm still doing good. God's still working through me. C.S. Lewis once said this, if you put first things first, second things will be thrown in. If you seek second things first, you will gain neither first things or even second things. If we put first things first, then the second things of life will be thrown in. We see Jesus say this as well. We see him say, seek first his kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you as well. And that's the problem, right? We get preoccupied. A lot of these secondhand things, they're not bad, but we get preoccupied with them. We start putting them first, and then we kind of just hope that God might throw in the kingdom at the end. And we need to continue to keep God first in everything we do, and we see that in Abraham's life as well. But we can learn from him for sure. So we got this, if you look at your bulletin, just cross out the title. This is what I do all the time. I'm sorry. I just change things up. So Thursday, I was going to talk a lot about Sodom and Gomorrah. You're like, ooh, what? We all kind of know that anyways, that story. Even if you're not reading, maybe if you don't read the Bible, you're not even a Christian, people all Sodom and Gomorrah. It's an interesting story as well. But then as I was reading chapter 18, I got stuck on this story because we don't talk about a whole lot. And then it's kind of personal to me. I kind of related to a long time ago, where somebody visited at our church, and it about these. I'm just going to scrap it all. So cross that out. Sorry for note taking. You're going to have to make your own outline all by yourself. Blank. The rest of you are like, nope. Let's go to chapter 18. Put your Bibles up. Chapter. Mostly be up on the board there. We'll start with verse. It's a very unusual story. It really is. It's an interesting story. And we see right away, we see three visitors that come to Abraham unexpected in the heat of the night. Verse 1, the Lord, here means Yahweh, appeared to Abraham near the great trees of the Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat. Seemed like a big deal, but this is a big deal. Here's a big word. You can write this down in your notes. You want theophany. Theophany is when we see this throughout the Bible. We see some times where God takes of something else, like a person here. How that works, people try to, they have the same thing. Was Christ was he fully human, fully God? All that, we're not going to wrap our brain around that. We do see this a few times throughout Scripture. God takes on this word for that is theophany. But we see this here, where God is Abraham, and he's one of these. Let me just pause that, because one of the things that we do see with Abraham as well, as we see with some other Bible, and we see in the is this word friend. What that means, relationship, friendship that we have with. What does that mean to you? And we see God giving that title to a lot of people. We see that with Abraham. First time we see it is in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. The last one we see James. The middle one is the interesting one. This is where God actually gives him that name. It's Isaiah 41. It's very quick. I'll just read it. God says to Israel, "You are Israel, my servant, the descendants of Abraham, my." And so we see this title. To me, it's interesting because we hear this vastness of God, but we bring this personal relationship. It's a hard concept to kind of wrap our brain. That God is. We've been talking about this vastness of God, this inner space, the outer space, all this. The bigger God is, it seems we see that He's specific. Everything about us, every hair on our head. He says, I think the sparrows are way more. And he goes on and have this fear of heaven and hell. We have this, but we also have this very intimate relationship with God. And it kind of goes against what we even see in. We have a business where you're a CEO of a. But it starts out and it's very small. Everybody. But once it gets bigger, you don't have that relationship. We see that in all kinds. It kind of goes against what we already know. How big God is, specific is about you. He knows your every desire, things you struggle with. He knows your past. He knows how often. He knows your relationship. He knows how much that you love. I mean, it's a crazy thing to look at when you see that. So I kind of want to see what are those attributes we see. Because here we have now the presence of God and how He. If God was here this morning, how would? About that lobby church. How would you treat Him? See that? And how it does affect. We have this God. John 15 says, He says, "No longer will I call you my servant, but I will call you my." So here's some of the attributes. You're going to need, if you're going to be a friend of God, your life is going to be changing. You might have all your ducks in a row. God likes to come in, likes to change things. Anybody have plans in their life? Do this, and then God just changed them. Took you to left, right, or straight, wherever you. Genesis 18:1. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent. The heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw three men standing. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent and bowed low. We're going to be God's friend. We're going to see that he's going to change direction and plans are going to, we're going to have to learn to. The Lord just shows up here. Sarah had no time to tent. She didn't vacuum. She's like, okay, we got guests. We all know what that's. Abraham, clothes. Place is a mess. I mean, I know what it's like when we get the knock on the door, the unexpected guest. It's no fun, is it? You're like, quick. I mean, how many times have you just really quiet? Right? You're like, shh, everybody quiet. Turn down the TV. Stand real still. Maybe they won't know. You know, an unexpected guest, it works if you have a good friend. Be spontaneous if you have a really, I mean, it has to be a really good friend, where you're just like, yeah, come into the house. This is how you're going to hide it. It's a, we call it a living, actual. But we don't do that with unexpected guests. You're still trying to prove something, trying to be somebody or not, you know, and have spot. Without spontaneity, we have to be ready for God to change. He's going to change. We always have our own. God has his plan. And so be ready to watch your life get changed left. Being flexible and having this spontaneity of our walk with Christ. And we see that with number 2, humility. This we see often. This comes up every time with relationship with God, and it's got to be in your relationship. You see this humility. Verse 2, Abraham looked up, he saw the 3 men standing nearby, and when he saw them, he hurried from the end of the to meet them, bowed low. This bow low to the ground, it's an English translation, it's used. Abraham is 99 years old. He has flocks. He's made an impact. He has much influence. Kind of uppity. He brag a lot. And this friendship's it's not like the big guy in the sky. It's not a guy you go golfing, talk about. There's maybe this old story, maybe you guys heard. But a minister have me tell you the story. Like, hey, did you know? This guy was a minister, and he would always tell this woman, survive. And he would tell everybody. Talk to him about tell you about, hey, that I survived. And so then he died, and he went to heaven. Of course, he meets Peter, and Peter's like, yeah, I've heard this from, hey, have you flood of the flood? He's like, and then as he's walking into heaven, Peter tells this guy, hey, just so you know, tonight we're having a testimony night. If join us, you sure can. Like, hey, can I? He said, yeah, you sure can. Understand who's in the audience tonight? Noah will be in the audience. So if you're going to have a flood story, it better be a good one when Noah is in the audience. We start to think, ourselves, really great. But humility and worship are key to our relationship. And God is in the room. And he's here with us today. He's here with you when you're at home. It's not just here in this building. This is not a temple. That's Old Testament. He now is us. We are the temple. This is how we worship now, is through our lives, what we see. Scripture. Verse 3, he said, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your by. And that Lord means mighty, it means strong one. Someone once said, you don't boast about your model rocket when talking to a NASA. You don't brag about your paint by number, Picasso. Right? You don't claim equality with Einstein, just write down. We don't talk about our present. You've got to know where we stand. He said, if I found favor in your eyes, my Lord, Do not pass your servant. Let a little water be brought. You may wash your feet, rest under this tree. Get you something refreshed, and go on your way. And now that you have come to your servant, so very well, they answered, as you said. So Abraham hurried into the tent with Sarah. He said, get these 3 measures of the finest flour and knead it. Then he ran to the herd and selected the choice tender, and he gave it to his servant who hurried to. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf and had prepared. And he set these things. And while they ate, he stood near the tree and said, where's your wife Sarah? There in the tent. So we have this spontaneity. Third thing that we have that it's ministry. But it's serving. We see Abraham. I don't know if you first came. That's probably the attitude. Be the hands and feet. We're excited about something. How can I jump? Being a follower of Christ, serve is we have that attitude. Ministry. All of us should be involved. God is the hands of ministries that might not even be in this church, but in some way or another serve, using your talents to be able to ministry. You see Abraham. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, 3 measures of the finest flour, and knead it, bake some bread. Ran to the herd of the selected choice. He didn't get the one that was about to die. He got the one that had, right? He got the good stuff. God is a servant, prepared it, they got it already, and they give God our best. We see our relationship with Christ. We see Abraham. We see that he not the second, the leftover stuff. Give him. This is that story that always makes. Long time ago, gosh, probably 16, 17. We get transient. Talk about transient being somebody who from Arizona and they're traveling right down in Oakley, and then they're trying to get Indiana. I mean, I've heard a million stories. That's not just that's our church, but all the churches. We just had one, and I let Rhonda take care of it. I was just listening in my office as she's trying to solve these. And that's what happens. I mean, they come to you with this huge problem. We're broke down. We're stuck. We need this. We need that. And you're like, I don't know what to do. I mean, it's like you have to stop everything. Sometimes we've been able to help people in crazy ways. Other times we have the Minister Alliance, vouchers, gas, and so we see them a lot. A lot of times they're in the foyer just waiting. A lot of times they're sitting in the just waiting. And so I've seen it, and I walk in, I'm like, and then I get the story. A lot of times the story, probably not telling, try to take them along, and all kinds of. Well, this guy was different. I think I might have told you, I'm sorry, I'll be like this guy that just. But this guy was different. I mean, the second I walked through that door, I looked through that window right there by the soundboard, and I don't know, right where Mary is sitting, right in there. This guy is sitting there. There's this black guy with a nice little 1930s hat, put together perfect. He's sitting straight up at the wall. And the second I walked in, I went, and I thought of this story. This guy's an angel. The other two were angels. And I just in my thought, I know I'm not dramatic, but that's what I thought. It just hit me. This guy is different. So I go to him. I'm like, hey. And usually that, all right, this guy's got his story. His story, and he was like, and so then I started talking to this guy, and it just intrigued me more. I got, so he actually ended up helping missions. I'm sitting there talking to this guy, and so then it's getting late, so I'm like, all right, yeah, you want to stay here, couch down, some pillow, and if you're hungry, I'll get you some. So I go into my refrigerator, and I open it, and I'm thinking to myself, what if this guy, Jesus, or what, or God, or he is an angel? I'm not just going to give him leftover, some half-eaten piece of chicken. So, but that's how I thought. I don't remember what I gave him, but I do remember strawberries that we got. That was back when, and I remember, okay, yeah, strawberries. And I take him his food, but that's what I was thinking to myself. This is God, that an angel, whatever it is. I got to give him good stuff. I mean, that should be our attitude. I should have that attitude all the time with every treat. But it does change things when we think God is in the room. It really does. It does affect our behavior. And it does bring in these feelings. And so if God was here, if he was part of it, he didn't walk in on him, or he came to your house unexpectedly, how would you act? We want to give him our best. And that's how our attitude should be. And we see Abraham giving him the choicest of foods here. I think that's a way to look at work. What if God was standing right there? And just start thinking of it that way. It will change. You get to see how Abraham, because he knew this, got some good lessons. It's our willingness to do. Obeying God. It's actually doing. It's the action. John 14 says this, you are my friend. If I do what I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you for everything that I have learned. I have made. God has brought us in. We do have this relationship. Put our word into practice. He needs to be the Lord of our family. Our spouse. He needs to. Then we see this contrast. We see Sarah. We know she didn't. She was part of this story. She didn't believe that God was going to. So she definitely showed. Look at verse 9. Where is your wife Sarah? There in the tent. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next. Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the. Nobody. This is what she was doing. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself, as she thought, after I am worn out, the Lord is old, will I now have. She's kind of, I don't know what kind of laugh it was. It's probably one of those. And then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am anything too hard to you? And Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. Just calls her out. They said, yeah. She wasn't in that faith. She didn't have that trust. we see this contrast. So I think this morning, ask the same to you. Is there anything too hard for God to do? Come this morning with some kind of problem, this morning with some kind of decision, something that's bothering, something that's a struggle. The question is, are you going to give that? Are you going to show these things that we see, this spontaneity, this humanity, this generous, this willingness to do what he says, to be in service? Do you have the faith of God will? Continue to have the faith lives out. Messes up. Times he didn't have. He always had that foundational. Here's what happens. It's not just a week. It's not just a month thing that happens so often. It's a lifestyle. It becomes who you trust in him. This morning it's good. There's a lot of people. To me, this story is get to see what God were in right here. We saw him sitting, behaving that way everywhere. Father, I thank you. I thank you for all the lessons that you've given us through these men. And Lord, I thank you for Genesis, the lessons we. Lord, I pray that we can look at this life, see if this is our life, to be humble, to serve our best, obey your scripture. Thank you for this congregation. I pray that you challenge it. I pray that we could go out this morning, practice this week. Let us not forget. Let us not just get away and forget. Continue out. Put us in some very specific places in our these here and have the you may serve